It's been a long time since I did my last tier list, so here is an updated one with all the new buffs and nerfs introduced. Take a look at the timestamps if you are only interested on one killer. Let's start with the D tier, the worst killers in Dead by Daylight that need some really needed quality of life changes in order to become better. Sadly, the poster boy of Dead by Daylight is in my opinion the weakest killer and the lowest in the list. Even with the extra 10 seconds added to each gen, the trapper still needs to find all his traps around the map, which is based on luck, and he still needs to set them up at good spots. Survivors can disarm the traps while you're busy chasing another survivor, and the only strong playstyle you have with the trapper is camping the basement. If I need to play in one of the most disgusting ways possible to have this killer viable, then sadly, this killer is just bad. And let's not even start talking about playing against decent survivors. In that case, you're just an N1 killer. He has no map mobility, not a lot of game pressure, not a lot of map pressure, and he is very dependent on the maps, as well as having one of the weakest early games in the game. He is unplayable without corrupt intervention. The only positive part that I see about Trapper is how his power can completely turn a lost game into a win. But those situations are so dire that when they happen, it feels more like a miracle. Michael Myers is, just like the Trapper, a remnant from the past, where the game was not as fast as now and survivors were actually scared of the killers. And with this new meta of hyper-focus and prove thyself squads with brand new parts, Myers' early game is way too slow and weak to compete. What saves him above Trapper is the fact that he is just fun to play, and he has some crazy add-ons too. On one hand, you can play with the mirror add-ons and have a fun match overall if survivors don't take the game seriously, because otherwise, they can loop you infinitely on certain spots due to how slow you walk. On the other hand, you have the Tombstone add-ons, which are the most busted add-ons in Dead by Daylight, and yet, even while having them, Myers still cannot compete against the stronger killers in the game. Plus, survivors can just hide in a locker to counter it once they detect that something about him is wrong. His power has a lot of balance issues that need a lot of quality of life changes. Freddy took a major nosedive from being one of the strongest killers in Dead by Daylight to becoming a joke. His snares are very clunky and useless. Clown does his job way better. His pallet add-on power is downright useless against survivors that have more than one brain cell and is only useful against solo queue survivors. And remember all the perks I said were good on him, like Pop Goes the Whistle or Tinkerer? They all took a nerf that make them not as good as they were before. Freddy is also the only killer that becomes weaker on the endgame as he loses his power to teleport entirely. He needs another rework, because Freddy offers nothing special that another killer above him cannot provide, which is sad considering the source material having such an amazing potential for unique powers. The only positive I have with Freddy is the fact that his power can be used in a chase, and he has map pressure with his generator teleport, but that's about it. Sadako is another killer that took a massive nosedive, from being B tier to finding her place in the top D. Sadako is a very weak killer that does what any other killers can do, but worse. Her map teleport is not as strong as with the other killers, is telegraphed and everyone around the map knows you did it. She is very loud while demanifested and makes a directional audio cue that can help you know where she is. She has no anti-loop power or any chase power to help her end the hard chases faster. She has nothing against windows and pallets, and finally, her condemnation gimmick is not strong enough to be considered a slowdown. And a lot of people are trying to say that Sadako is a strong killer or a killer with high potential, but almost all of them that I have seen either use the Iridescent videotape add-on with the ring drawing to stack Condemned, or they use another gimmick build on Midwich, which is the strongest killer map in Dead by Daylight. Just like with the Trapper and Myers, if you need to use an Iridescent add-on to make her viable, then this killer is just not good. And don't get me wrong, I really enjoy playing Sadako because I feel she is unique enough to not be a complete M1 killer, but anytime I get survivors that are decent, and especially survivors that actually interact with the TVs and turn them off in-game or block any condemned survivors so they can escape and put the tape on, that's when you see that she simply cannot do much. Now that we finished with the D tier, we can climb up to the C tier. Killers that are kinda good but they cannot compete against really good survive with friends or competent survivors that know how to play against their power. After the technical change to how her trap boxes work, the pig is now in a relatively better spot than before, but her original spot was not very high. I like to play the pig, but that's for the same reason why I think she's weak. By design, she's just an M1 killer with a bonus slowdown once you catch a survivor. Her ambush is not very useful in certain loops as survivors will just leave, which is something more and more survivors are doing nowadays. She has no counter for prove thyself and hyperfocus squads, and her traps become useless if you didn't use them before the endgame. But for that reason I like her, because if you know how to play this killer well, you then know the fundamentals of playing an M1 killer. And for those saying that Pig has stealth in her kit, that part is true, but out of all the stealth killers in the game, she is the worst one. Now I have to admit something before talking about this killer. The Doctor is by far my most disliked killer to play as, so if you hear my bias on my voice, you know why this is. Even then, I just feel like he is a very easy killer to play wrong, as a lot of people don't know how his anti-loop works and they just simply spam it. But the thing is, Doctor has not much in his kit to truly become one unstoppable beast of a killer. His anti-loop power is not an attack like Nemesis or Pyramid Head, and instead it's a status effect that you have to time in a specific way only for the survivor to not drop the pallet. It's such a type of anti-loop that is definitely on the weaker side of all anti-loop powers. You can definitely accomplish some nasty hits with it, but the pallet will still remain in place. The fact that this killer is the best one in terms of tracking in the game is not at the top of this list, just shows how his power is truly nothing special. The clone is a solid chaser with a very oppressive ability that can guarantee a down on very unprepared survivors and make some nasty plays against good ones. However, competent survivors will pre-drop the pallet, and in this situation you have to set up your bottles correctly in order to get a hit. His yellow bottles are cool, but not enough to compensate for his lack of map pressure, as he has absolutely nothing in his kit for that. Because of that reason, a team that is rushing generators will always beat Clown, unless they are using the red pinky finger add-on, which makes Clown a very strong killer that can camp and down survivors very easily, but that's not enough to put him above the rest of the killers. After their last power and add-on rework, the Legion are no longer the weakest killers in Dead by Daylight. They are now the most annoying to play against, so annoying that they nerfed Thanatophobia really hard to the point it's useless with other killers now. Legion is very fun to play as in my opinion, but they definitely stand no chance against a competent team that splits up, as that's essentially their biggest counter. A Legion can't do much against survivors that start running to the opposite side once they hear the Legion coming. The cool part about Legion is giving their 4th hit, which makes the 5th one be an instant down. But after you sacrifice one survivor, that feat is almost impossible unless the first person starts to immediately mend, and survivors are becoming smarter and smarter. What was once very easy now requires the never sleep pill add-ons to guarantee. I am however glad that they are no longer dog water to play as. Finishing off the C tier, we have the Trickster, who is a very interesting case of a killer. For some survivors, he's the bane of their existence as he can take them down extremely easy with almost no effort. For others, he's the weakest killer in the game. Trickster has a lower running speed than base, which means if you're looping a survivor in tall loops like the Shack or other hard spots like the hay bales in Coldwind or the rocks in Macmillan, you will be there for a long time. And that is really interesting, because his power is probably one of the most lethal powers in Dead by Daylight. He is a character that puts all of his points in charisma, but 0 in map pressure and map mobility. For that reason, your games as Trickster will go either one way, or you absolutely melt survivors really fast but still get generators done, or you will have a very hard time in chases and the generators will still get done. Trickster is a perfect example that killers nowadays require some type of slowdown or map mobility to become viable, as being very strong in chases is simply not enough. He also took a massive nerf with the Dead Hard nerf, as he can still get all 6 stacks cancelled if the survivor times it right. Also, his main power event is very inconsistent, as you have a limited time window to use it, which means most of the time it will go to waste, and other times it's a game changer. That's all for C tier. Now we're going to be talking about B tier, and the killers here I find have a good power design, and most of them I would say are pretty balanced. Deathslinger is an interesting case of a killer. In theory, he's just another range killer that has no map mobility and pressure, but his power works more effectively in a lot of loops, and most importantly, distance. While Trickster is an SMG that has to come very close to the survivors to have any effect, as it's very easy to miss or hide from him if he is far away, Deathslinger is a menace on 18 meters. Not only that, unlike Trickster, if you hit a shot, the survivors have to mend, which makes them lose a small amount of time. Deathslinger also has a guaranteed injured state against some loops where survivors have no other options other than to fake the windows or pallets. The most important part of his power is the fact that it counts as a basic attack, meaning that out of all of the range killers, Deathslinger is the only one that can take advantage of perks like Sloppy Butcher, Starstruck, Noed, and that perk synergy gives him a bigger advantage over Trickster. Ghostface also received a rework along with Legion some time ago, and to be honest, while his base power feels very similar, his add-ons are actually really strong and he is overall a good baseline killer. The fact that you can down survivors instantly by catching them off guard, and he has amazing synergy with all basic attack perks like Sloppy Butcher, Jolt, or the exposed ones. But still, Ghostface starts to fall off the more competent the survivors are, and I feel he could even be worse than Deathslinger if they both play against competent survivors. But overall, Ghostface is better. Cenobite is a very strange killer that feels either overpowered or underpowered, and that depends on so many factors that make it hard to rank this killer. First of all, his box mechanic is busted against teams that don't know how to play against him, but teams that are coordinated will have no problem with this part of his power. His anti-loop can feel extremely weak and useless, even detrimental sometimes. And then in other spots, it feels extremely strong, especially when you cancel the speed boost a survivor gets after a hit, or when an automatic chain gets them while you are stuck in an animation. Cenobite has the potential to be one of the strongest killers in the game, but since he's so inconsistent, I rate him at B. Wraith is a well-balanced killer in my opinion. I just wish he was not nerfed because he could definitely be higher in this list. The gameplay that Wraith offers is in my opinion really cool, but he is one of the only killers in the game that the survivors can actively hurt, and since his chase power was nerfed, he is not as strong as he used to be. However, unlike almost all of the killers in lower tiers, his speed while invisible helps him pressure the entire map, which is something that killers like Ghostface wish they could. I do have to add the fact that his add-ons are actually really cool and offer a lot of different playstyles that are fun to play as and against. I think a nice middle ground B tier is a well-deserved spot for him. Nemesis, just like Cenobite, has an RNG component on his power, and that are his zombies. Sometimes they are amazing companions, and other times they are useless, but unlike Cenobite, Nemesis' power is actually strong in chases, as it leaves survivors with not a lot of options, and once you get to tier 2, he can shred through pallets on any map. Nemesis is built to chase. He could definitely be stronger if he didn't have one of the worst add-on selections in the entire game. I and many others believe that Demogorgon is the pinnacle of a perfectly balanced killer. He is a jack of all trades, he has anti-loop, map traversal, map pressure, and some people even count his stealth as part of his kit, but I personally think it's so useless it shouldn't be counted. He also greatly benefits from the recent buffs to the base kit power, as basically everyone already uses save the best for last with Demo. He is the definition of balance, and for that reason, he had to go down from A tier to B tier, and be in the middle of all killers. I know a lot of people are going to disagree with the next two choices I have on this list, but I really think Leatherface is low-key a menace. He can instantly down survivors very easily, and he is really strong when defending a territory. The fact that his chainsaw can shred through pallets, and add in the fact that he can proxy camp survivors, makes him very hard to play against once you find a Leatherface main that is sweaty. I think a lot of people see Bubba and think that he is just a meme killer, but I really feel that he has amazing potential when played in a really disgusting way. Of course, Reassurance completely destroyed his camping potential, so I am not even going to talk about it. Some of you will agree with me, Some of you will hate me and leave a dislike. Hillbilly is by far the hardest killer to master in this game, more than Blight, more than Nurse, and he is a really powerful killer. He has map mobility and he can end chases extremely fast, and if you get a Hillbilly main that knows what he's doing, I think there's nothing survivors can do in regards to their own gameplay. However, despite all of this, there are two main reasons I put Hillbilly on the top of B tier. The first one is that having an extremely high ceiling is bad for the average player, so most of the Hillbillies you're going to play against, and most of the people playing Hillbilly, are not that good, and they make this character look bad. The second part is that most of the maps really hurt Hillbilly's power, like Garden of Joy or any indoor map. I think Hillbilly's power is one of the most fun and interactable powers in Dead by Daylight, and I would say one of the best designed powers as well, but that is not enough to compete against the awful maps that have been released lately. Now we are finally going to talk about the hard hitters, those killers that are really strong and can compete against competent survivors either with disgusting tactics or by their amazing powerful powers. The twins have a disgustingly powerful power that helps them be one of the strongest slugging killers in Dead by Daylight, and also really strong campers as well. Twins' power helps them do the most disliked strategies in Dead by Daylight, and add in the fact that most people did not play against twins and so they don't know how to counter them makes them become stronger than they are perceived. However, with the future changes to slugging, this killer will take a big hit, and I temporarily place them in the lowest A tier to see if my opinion changes after the patch hits the live game. Also, Twins has a really clunky power, and behavior promised a rework or rebalance of them, so I feel this spot is the best they can have as of right now. Just like Twins, the Hack's power helps her camp and defend objectives, and she is one of the only killers in the game that has no limit as to how close her power can be to a hooked survivor, so you can spam traps all around the hooks. The problem of Hack is the moment survivors know how to counter your power, in which case you might feel powerless against them. Luckily, she has some of the most busted add-ons that make her be a completely different and stronger killer. Oni is the strongest snowball killer in Dead by Daylight, able to shoot down an entire match with just one use of his power. He's basically a stronger Michael Myers, as he can use his power various times in the same match, whereas Myers is limited. He also has a type of tracking thanks to his blood orbs that spawn around injured survivors. However, Oni is powerless in the early game, and once you get survivors that abuse this fact by playing extremely safe or by pre-dropping pallets, you will feel very powerless. In fact, he is literally a M1 killer if he does not hit a survivor early in the game in order to start getting the blood orbs. Dredge is a new addition to Dead by Daylight, and I was totally wrong about this killer. I originally went as far as to say that this is going to be the weakest killer in the entire game just based on his PTB power, but it ended up coming with an incredibly fun and amazing power design. Dredge has crazy map mobility that can only be surpassed by killers like Blight and Nurse, and its snowball potential while in Nightfall makes it very scary during this period. Dredge also has a nice anti-loop that is more powerful than most of the anti-loops. However, survivors can easily counter this by simply walking away from it. There is the counter weakness of survivors locking the lockers, but the add-ons its power has compensate for it massively. I also think Lavalier Mike is one of the most busted add-ons in the entire game when combined with Lethal Pursuer. Overall, I think Dredge is a strong killer, but I am welcome to debate whether he truly deserves this placement or he should be lower on the list. But based on my own experiences and games playing with him, I feel like he is a strong killer overall. The Huntress is a perfectly designed killer. Her power is basic but has an insane skill ceiling. She is easy to play as and against, and that's what makes her so powerful. The fact that she can damage survivors super fast and snowball insanely quick. No matter where you are, the Huntress range attack has the most range and lethality out of the two other ranged killers, which is what makes her so scary. The most insane Huntress mains can do some plays that no other killer in the game is able to, and the fact that a killer with no map mobility is able to be so high on this list proves that the power is all she needs to compete against the top survivors. I think Wesker is the closest we got to another type of Blight killer in terms of power and fun. Wesker is able to cover some insane distance and he has a very powerful anti-loop now that his hitbox became better. He also has the option to ignore some god palettes and instead continue the chase, and he's one of the killers with the most amount of versatility in the game. He can use a lot of different builds with different playstyles. Wesker's add-ons are also great. They are not game changing, but instead they buff his power a lot, and his Ouroboros infection is a nice slowdown mechanic as survivors cannot ignore it, unlike the Nemesis. Just like Dredge, Wesker is a new addition to the tier list, so I am open to debate whether he does belong here or not. Survivors are really lucky that not many people play the Plague, because she has been one of the strongest killers since her release in the game. Not only she has amazing perks to start with, but her power is extremely powerful. I know a lot of people have the notion of just not cleansing against Plague to deny her power, but what I don't take into account is the fact that you end up being a one-hit M1 killer with amazing tracking abilities, and if survivors do cleanse, you have one of the most overpowered powers in the game, Corrupt Purge. She also has an amazing potential just like Oni with her Purge if she decides to slug the survivors. Pyramid Head has one thing that no other killer in the game has. He is the only killer that can totally counter all survivor meta perks like Decisive, Off the Record, Burrow Time, Unbreakable. For that single reason, he is truly the only killer that can tunnel a survivor right at the start of the game with basically no counter. Playing against 3 survivors instead of 4 and with increased time of generators is almost confirming a win for Pyramid Head. Plus, his range attack is an amazing anti-loop and most of the times it can confirm hits on bolts. However, despite that, Executioner still has to follow the rules of a normal game in order to achieve that first down, which holds him back from the next tier, the S tier. The Artist is hypothetically a killer that no team can survive against if the Artist does not miss a single projectile attack. She has crazy tracking, crazy anti-loop that only has one counter, Leave the Loop, and she is also a ranged killer. The Artist is extremely powerful and one of the only killers able to multitask while in a chase. You can pressure a survivor from across the map while you're chasing another one. Add in the fact that she combines very well with a lot of gen blocking perks like Deadlock, Pain Resonance and Deadman Switch, and you got the formula for a really strong killer. The only reason she is not above Spirit is due to her add-ons, and talking about Spirit, I have no idea what behavior intended with her add-on rework, but the Spirit still has some of the most cracked add-ons in the game. Her Mother-Daughter ring is busted, and that's not her only add-on that boosts speed. Spirit has always been one of the top 3 killers in Dead by Daylight, and it does not look like anything will make her fall from this spot. She also has something that Artist doesn't, and that is map mobility. The Blight is one of the best designed killers in terms of base kit. He is fun to play as and fun to play against. The problem starts when you add overpowered add-ons and perks on top, and just a little bit of crazy game techs like the hook tech or whatever name you give it, and that's what makes this killer be the second strongest one in the game. The fundamental issue with Blight's add-ons is that unlike most of the killers in the game, Blight is constantly using his power to either chase or move across the map. Take a look at Trapper's Iridescent add-ons, and you will see that they only affect his traps and that's it. However, the Blighted Crow for Blight will increase the speed of every single rush you do in a match, and that adds up to crazy value. Plus, Alchemist Ring and Compound 28 are busted and they prove way too much power compared to the rest of the add-ons in the game. Blight is not a problem, the add-ons are. And now to the surprise to nobody, let's talk about the most overpowered killer in Dead by Daylight for more than 5 years, the Nurse. She needs a rework or a nerf to her power. She fundamentally breaks the core gameplay of Dead by Daylight and instead she just ignores everything the game has. I don't think just making her power attack not count as a basic one is enough of a change for her to stop being the most powerful killer in the game. She needs something more. I don't care what arguments you bring, a killer being able to do this is just incredibly overpowered. She has insane map mobility even Blight wished to have. She can end chases extremely fast, making even the most professional tricksters envious. And don't try to lie to yourself, the Nurse is not that hard to play like people seem to make. Yes, she might have the highest skill floor in the entire game, but her skill ceiling is not as high in order to start demolishing survivors. Whenever you are playing against Nurse, you don't counterplay her. The only way to survive a chase is to have the killer make a mistake. Will we ever see the day where a killer is in a higher spot than Nurse? Comment what you think of my tier list and if you agree or disagree. Thank you for watching and have a nice day.